There was like 5 of us with Mark Royce, the president of GM, and I asked him about dealers, and he made like a really salient point. He said, it's on us, the automakers. He said, if we supply one EV model to a dealer, they're like, it's not a business, it's a hobby. We don't care, we're not interested. But if we give them 3 models, 4 models, they have to start paying attention.
Welcome to the Urban EV Podcast. Our guest today is Loren McDonald, the founder of Chargeonomics and one of the leading analysts covering EV charging, infrastructure, and market trends. We're going to dig deep into what he's seeing beneath the surface of the EV transition. His research reveals a lot, so stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Loren, you have a pedigree as an EV analyst with quite the social media following on LinkedIn. Let's just skip the formal bio for now. We'll get into that later and talk about the elephant in the room, gas prices.
Gas prices.
What's going on right now, and how's it going to affect the EV industry?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's going to help. You know, the only question is how much, right? Actually, literally right before I jumped on this podcast, I did a quick LinkedIn post looking at EV sales for 9 fully electric EVs, where the month of March sales were reported across the 9, up 33% in March versus February, up 70% versus January. So we're seeing that, you know, after we have the trough of post-tax credit, every month it's just going back up. Now, you know, those 9 may not be indicative of the other, you know, like 80 BEVs out there, but it's clearly, you know, we're back on track, and the gas prices, right, have really only been an impact the last like 2 weeks or so. But everybody's probably heard about like the Edmunds survey that says that, you know, or not survey, but data that EV searches on their website are up 20% and stuff like
up,
that.
yeah.
There's a lot of indicators out there. I also, not to get deep into the data weeds, Rob and Scott, but years ago, I did 2 separate regression analysis projects where I looked at more than 30 variables, everything from across the 50 states and DC, where I looked at everything from like average VMT in the state to income to education to gas prices to solar deployment to density, like to all these different things. And in both cases, gas prices had the highest correlation with state EV sales. A lot of people argued with me and said, well, that may not be causation. It might just be correlation. And it's a solid point. But I still believe gas prices have a significant impact, right, on how people start thinking about moving away from a gas-powered vehicle to hybrid, plug-in hybrid, fully electric. And that's why California, I think, has always been so far ahead of everybody, because we've always had significantly higher gas prices, partially because of the special mix that we have to do with the gas and stuff. We adopted, you know, the Prius, like, not me personally, but we adopted hybrids like in a massive way. And so I think our psyche out here in California and Hawaii and Washington and Oregon and stuff is, you know, people talk about $4 gas prices right now. We'd love to have $4 gas prices.
Yeah, right.
I know
Right.
New York, it's not that much better either. So people are complaining about that. I'm like, that's normal, isn't it?
Yeah. So not to belabor it, but I think, you know, when you are in a market where gas prices are sort of always higher, like you're more likely to consider alternative powertrains and stuff. So the real question is going to be, you know, how long this goes on. And, you know, because if gas prices come down in a month or 2, then it might only have a small blip. But, you know, if they continue on through the summer, right? Which is a lot of people are saying they will, because once it's sort of the dominoes fall, it takes a long time for the prices to come back. So I know that was a really long answer, but I think, yeah, not to get political, but I think, you know, the Trump administration has done everything they can to slow down, you know,
subvert the EV
charging
industry.
deployment and
Yeah.
EVs production and sales and stuff. and the Iran war is actually going to increase interest in
It's the great
EVs. So
irony, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah,
it is. It really is. Yeah.
I've noticed
Well, and I
that.
think something you said kind of caught my interest a little bit. The idea also that people on the coasts generally are just, socially more likely to buy EVs and things. But then when we think about like the middle coast, right, like the Midwest, the plains, they're really unlikely to buy EVs because of all kinds of political reasons and whatever. How do you think this is going to affect people there? I mean, obviously, we talk about, as Rob and you both said, gas prices on those coasts, they tend to be higher anyway. But in the middle of the country where gas prices are super cheap, they're now feeling the pinch on that on the wallet. How is that going to affect EV sales there? It's way
Yeah,
more
no,
interesting to me.
it's a great question and point, Scott, because one of the things is the difference of people that live in like Wisconsin and places like the Midwest. They drive everywhere, right? Like they don't fly to Disney World in Orlando. They drive, right?
No,
Where
I'm from Minnesota, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, and it's a really interesting thing, right? Where those of us like in Northern California, right? We get on Southwest and fly to Disneyland, right? I mean, yeah, sure, oftentimes we'll drive down there and stuff. But it's a really different psyche in that we tend to like fly more for longer distances, and people in the Midwest, they're like road trip, woohoo, right? Like and go. So I think part of that is they're gonna feel this a bit more, even though the prices may not be $6 or $7 a gallon, they may only be $4.50. They're gonna feel it more because they tend to drive more and they tend to be in more like rural areas and stuff where they do those like 3-hour trips to Costco in the big city or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they're gonna feel it a bit more.
Where they get their cheap Costco gas, by the way, normally.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's exactly, exactly. Don't forget the hot dog, the dollar hot dog, right? But I think like the interesting thing again, not to get into the wonky data weeds, like there's a lot of the states in the Midwest and the Upper Plains states, their annual average VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is like 11, 12, 13,000 miles.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it's like just a bit over 8,000 in
Yeah.
California,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so those miles times an extra dollar, right, is going to add up. So I think it could actually, Scott, it could have us, it could raise the awareness, right? Because I think there's also, you mentioned the politics. Hopefully now a lot of people are thinking about, solar, EVs, et cetera, and that actually, I may be a conservative politically, but conservatives always used to be about lower energy costs and
yeah, of
energy
course.
independence and things like that. So I think that conversation about, oh yeah, what if I put solar in my roof and charged my EV with that? Like
Yeah,
maybe
there's a
that'll,
knock-on effect. Once you open the door to getting an
yeah,
EV, well, it'd make a whole lot more sense to have a battery pack in my garage, have it powered by solar, and make things way cheaper.
yeah. And Scott, it's
Next
like,
thing you know, they're all going to be wearing Birkenstocks and going to Grateful Dead concerts too.
Dare to
Fucking
dream,
hell.
Scott.
and eating granola and yogurt for breakfast, right? Oh
Exactly,
my God.
exactly. But
But I think
do you think that this could be ultimately the antidote to range anxiety and charging anxiety for these people? I think that's always been a contributing factor.
no, no, no.
No.
And those are still like the biggest issues, right? It's
I
like
I, I want to
actually
pivot to that actually. Yeah, Lauren,
yeah,
I really want to pivot to that. But before we do, real quick, because I'm putting a pin for just a second, because there is a big picture over here, Scott, that I think that, and I'm sure it seems like Lauren here is in agreement that there's the EV industry is getting certain things right and certain things very wrong right now, and that has to be solved as well. The antidote here is not just the higher gas prices, but it's certainly pushing the needle over. So before we dive all into that, could you just do a quick introduction right now? Tell us who you are. Tell us how you got into EVs and how you became such a subject matter expert.
yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, we've talked about and joked about, being from California and stuff like that. But it is true. It's sort of in the blood and in the DNA. And I grew up in the Bay Area and my dad was in the lumber business and stuff. And so I spent a lot of time outdoors. And so from really a little kid, I actually saw the future would be electric vehicles. I don't know how I did, but I just always saw that would
This
be
is
a
pre
future.
EV1. You're talking about way back in the day.
Yeah, actually, I had an order in on the EV1, but
Wow.
I guess I didn't make enough money at the time or something, didn't qualify. And I actually, since we're digressing, one of my claims to fame is I actually have a postcard, yes, a postcard stamped in 1996 where I applied for a public relations job to US Electric Car, which was a electric car startup in Sebastopol, California that and they sent back, you were eminently qualified, we don't have any openings right now. And 6 months later they went bankrupt, right? And but
Familiar
but
tune.
so that's what, 30 years ago, if my math is correct. And so I wanted to get into the industry literally 30 years ago, and maybe thank goodness I didn't, right? But yeah, I was always interested. My career was in marketing. Actually, I was a marketing executive, everything from CMO, VP of marketing, and ultimately I became a marketing evangelist for marketing software companies.
Mm.
And but then in my spare time, my hobby, I started writing. I started a blog and started writing about solar and EVs and water. We're always in, droughts here in California and stuff. And one day in late 2016, I said, I've got to get focused. And it's either going to be, I'm going to turn left and do water or turn right and do EVs. And I decided to focus on EVs because I thought it would be more interesting from like a behavioral economics perspective. All the things that we're talking about and going to talk about, what is going to hinder and help drive EVs. And so then I launched EV adoption, and in my spare time started getting customers and things like that and speaking and things. And then, like happened to many people during COVID, I lost my corporate job and it became my full-time business, and I never looked back. And then, Rob, your point on LinkedIn, I was like a lot of people, I was on Twitter and LinkedIn and, whatever, but I got some really good advice from somebody who said focus, right? So I got off Twitter, focused on LinkedIn, and it's been one of the best career decisions I've ever made, just leaning into LinkedIn and focusing on that. And I like to say, because of LinkedIn, a company bought my company, right? So
That's perfect
you know,
scenario.
yeah.
And listen, I follow you on a regular basis. That's how we met. I reached out to Lauren after, just one post too many that I liked and commented on. I got to speak to this guy. And here we are right now. Now, remind me again, do you do your own analytics? Is this your own? This is your research, correct? You're not just quoting
Yeah.
other people's research.
No. Yeah. So I'm sort of rebuilding because I sold my business to a company called Perrin and then left after a year. You guys as startup entrepreneurs sort of understand that. But yeah, so I'm just building all these different databases, tracking everything from, like I said, EV sales to charging things, robo taxis, just V2G, like just tracking sort of all aspects of where I'm really trying to focus and sort of build a name and a brand and expertise is at the intersection of EVs and charging, right? They drive each other, right? And so bringing those two things together is kind of really my focus.
Great. I mean, I guess in a certain way you're preaching to the choir because we're in full alignment with that. So on that note right now, there's a problem between that intersection right now, and we're all aware of it. It's just not perfectly aligned. So once again, let's circle back to that original question with the EV industry. What's it getting right and what's it getting wrong right now? Kind of the big, open the aperture kind of viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think one area that they're getting right is that they finally realize that they have to get involved in the charging infrastructure and charging experience. I did a long media interview yesterday with somebody that's working on a story about the automakers getting into the charging industry. And, you all remember, years ago, the automakers all said, we don't need to get into the charging industry. We never had to get into the gas station business, right? Meanwhile, Tesla's sales are just doing this, right? And their sales are doing this, right? And and so then, they started to wake up. I mean, Electrify America, which is the VW Dieselgate, got in it because they were in the penalty
Yeah.
box, right? But then, Rivian, you know,
Hmm.
was really sort of replicating the Tesla model with direct sales and stuff. And they had their brand of, sort of outdoors
The Adventure
enthusiasm,
Network.
off-road adventure, right? So they said, we're going to go put them out, on the way to Yosemite and places like that. That's who our customers are. So they had a specific reason. And, then you had Mercedes enter and you had Iona and you had the Ford Charge Network. And it was like, wait a minute, I thought you didn't have to build gas stations, right? So I think, the one of the first things that happened is they finally understood the math, and the critical connection between, if people don't have confidence that they can drive anywhere, especially those people in the Midwest, right, who, have long distances to go, if they don't feel confident that they can go on a road trip and access fast, reliable charging, they're not going to consider an EV. So I think, Rob, that's sort of one of the first things is we saw this sort of mind shift set. One of the things, though, speaking of charging, that they've been getting wrong, and a few of them actually have been getting right, is they overly focused on public fast charging. So you see all these dozens and dozens of partnerships for, free fast charging. You get a year fast charging, etc. Well, if you're a stereotypical EV buyer, you're probably, middle to upper income, living in a, suburban single family home. You have access to charging, 362 days a year in your garage, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're a road trip fiend. And Ford, I was flown back to Dearborn last year, myself and a few other analysts and stuff, and Ford did a presentation around their Power Promise program, where they actually paid for installing home charging for buyers of the Mustang Mach-E. And they wouldn't actually they wouldn't share the actual numbers, but they said it had a massive increase in sales, right? That program directly led to a significant increase in sales. And so, Rob, one of the things, so they got right in getting involved in charging, but they overly focused on public fast charging, where the real issue is, as I always say, why would you buy an EV if you couldn't charge where you live? Right? That's one of the
biggest
Well, again, I mean, I think
it
it's
offers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Scott.
I think it's the car company mentality, right? You didn't get gas at home, so you're not going to charge at
Right.
home. So they
Yeah.
immediately thought, let's install these big public. And none of the gas companies, look, I worked with Pilot Flying J in my past career. None of these gas station companies wanted to get into the electric charging business because it didn't make any sense. The money was in diesel, selling diesel to truck drivers. They didn't care about it. So someone eventually had to step up, and again, the car company had this mentality of, you get gas at a gas station, you're going to get electricity at a gas station too. So let's build out all of that infrastructure, not thinking about, as you say, the fact that there's, juice at home that you could tap into.
So one of the positives is that some of the automakers started leaning into those sort of home charging programs, right? That to me is one is the big, yes, we need to give people confidence that they can go on road trips, but consumers will never even consider an EV if they can't charge at home, right? And so the next we could do a whole podcast on multifamily, right? But
Yeah,
that's
well, that's
really
definitely that's where I live. Yeah,
that's
the next challenge.
That's the next big I mean, it has been for years, but people are finally starting to wake up to it, that, there's roughly 40 million US households of people that live in, multifamily. That's a big number, right? And we've got to find a way to get those multifamily owners to chargers, because people that live in apartments and condos, they go, I just want what my buddy has. I want to be able to pull into my garage and plug in and charge every night. And so we have to replicate that experience. And it's happening in a lot of the big institutional apartment owners, but the small, mom and pop owners, they're like, I'm selling it in 3 years. I'm not going to invest in this.
But I think they're not even thinking about it, to be honest. I think if you went to some of these, certainly in the Midwest and the Plain States, and said to these guys, look, you'll get more affluent people interested in living in your complexes if you just install this simple amenity that, by the way, you can charge for. Again, these people that own these buildings, they think, oh, you get gas at a gas station, you're going to get electricity at a charger. not you should be charging at home. I think there's a big opportunity there. We've had a couple of guys on the show that talked about some multifamily charging solutions that are really smart. I partially think it's just an awareness problem on the landlord side of things.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's some
yeah, and
capital costs up front that, Scott, that is the
Totally.
barrier. But if you
yeah,
understand the big picture, then it
yeah,
obviously it makes a
yeah.
lot more
But
sense.
most of the players out there that are in that space will do it at like no cost, right? They'll go and they'll deploy it. They'll do rev shares. They'll do different things like that. There's a lot of I'm a big fan of like level one charging and like the smart outlets, right? You can put in 2 to 3 times as many smart outlets where people you have a dedicated space. They pull into their dedicated space at the apartment. They scan a QR code, plug in their bring your own cable, and they wake up the next morning, they've added 30, 40, 50 miles, which is what they need to get to work and back the next day, right? And they
Yeah, still
supplement
better
it with
than nothing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Well, the
yeah,
key
no,
word
go
here
ahead.
is distributed energy when it comes to that. But there was something before I wanted to bring up a point. We had Matt Teskey on the show a while back, and he's talking about education when it comes to the dealerships themselves, to the actual
Yeah.
salespeople. This is a big factor. I think it's getting better, but still nowhere near where it should be. Because once again, if your salesperson is more motivated to make more money on the gas vehicle, they're going to try to sell that first. Even if they are selling the EV, they're not necessarily pushing to get that level 2 charger installed in your home. They just eventually they give you the keys or the card or whatever it is, the virtual thing for you to pull out of the lot, and you're on your own. Once you get there, and you're like, wait, how does this work? What's going on? And if they had that set up properly, and like what Ford is doing, like totally, I figured that would probably help boost sales. And it seems like you've already gotten a little insight that it perhaps it is.
Yeah, yeah, and
So yeah,
I'm yeah, Matt's a good friend of mine. Love Matt and quote him often. And yeah, I mean, the dealer he's been banging his head against trying to improve the sort of the dealer situation for 10 years and stuff. And I've personally experienced really bad EV purchase experiences at dealers where they just literally don't know anything about the EV models they're selling and don't care. We test drove a Mercedes several years ago, and the sales guy said it didn't have regenerative braking. My wife and I were on our second Tesla at the time, and we're like, "What do you mean it doesn't have regenerative braking?" Right? Of course it has regenerative braking. It's an EV, right? And long story short, right, we went back in to change drivers to test drive it. He brought in a tech and they're like trying to figure it out. And well, finally we went out and I found the setting and the navigation and right. And it's like, and then he said, well, I don't like it. Right. It's like too jerky. And,
yeah,
and I was sort of like, and it was sort of like, you realize, we're two-time Tesla drivers, and we already told you we love regenerative braking. And so it was like he didn't even want to sell us the car, right? And, I could go on with other stories. But yeah, and there obviously are a lot of dealers that are really good at selling EVs. Unfortunately, there's just too many that aren't there yet. But one of my favorite stories, Rob, is years ago. This is like, must have been like 6 years ago. GM used to fly me back when I was writing for Clean Technica. They thought I was like a journalist, right? So I got invited to a lot of things and went back, and actually myself and John Volker and a couple of other writers got in private room. There was like 4 of us, 5 of us with Mark Royce, the president of GM. And I asked him about dealers, and he made like a really salient point. He said, it's on us, the automakers. He said, if we supply one EV model to a dealer, they're like, it's not a business, it's a hobby. We don't care.
hmm
We're not interested. But if we give them 3 models, 4 models, they have to start paying attention. And one of my favorite case studies of the last few months is Cadillac, right? Cadillac
yeah.
has, four,
I love
I'm
what they're
not
doing.
including I'm not including the like $300,000 like that bespoke
Celestic or
EV,
something like that, I think it's called,
the
right? Yeah.
Celestic, yeah. But the other 4 models, guess what? They all look like Cadillac SUVs. They look normal. They have like 350, 400 miles of range. They're really good cars, right? They're solid cars. Cadillac had 27% of their US sales last year was from EVs. And in Q3 with the tax credit, it was like 44, I think. And, the point of that is, and then this is sort of getting back to your original questions about what are they doing right and wrong, is having multiple models, right? Giving people choice is one of the good things. And like Cadillac is a perfect example, right? You think about everything we've talked about. Who are the likely buyers of people getting it's upper income people living in suburbs with a big house. Well, that's a Cadillac buyer, older like me, like whatever, right? And so it was a perfect intersection of, the vehicle type. They didn't make like a sedan that nobody wants anymore, right? Big SUVs that are electric and expensive. And, it was like, this is not rocket science. And I've just been shocked. I'm going to get on a rant here, but
Yeah, you're in the right place, Lauren.
yeah, like the Afila, I can't even say it,
Oof.
like
Yeah.
sedan, like WTF, like,
Years ago, I'm like, where are they going with this? It's not even a good looking sedan. That's on top of everything else. It's like, who made this decision to develop a
I mean,
$90,000,
it's
$100,000 sedan
right that you
from
can play
Sony?
your Sony Xbox on, right? Like
Yeah, that was the
with,
gimmick.
mediocre range and charging curve and stuff. It's like literally nobody on the planet was interested in that car. Like, these are smart people. Like we're okay. Allegedly. Like we're like if
Allegedly.
right. If you consider like the Nissan Leaf in 2010 as the start of the modern era of EVs, like we're 16 years into this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like and you've seen like the sales of all the different model types and all the like who thought that would be successful?
Lauren, you tapped into something here, which I think is totally pertinent, full circle. Question I have for you right now. The Afila was going to be made in conjunction with Honda. Honda had the Zero series that they were developing a platform. Cadillac and GM, I believe, has been moderately successful because they built a platform.
They built
Ford,
a platform.
Stellantis, they built like individual cars.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was the problem. So it
Yeah.
seemed like Honda had this figured out. We're going to slow roll this, and we're going to do this right. We're going to build a platform, and they released these these cars, these prototypes, which I thought looked insane.
They
Really
they look like
progressive. They look for the
they
future.
look like something Elon Musk would like, right?
Yeah, right. And either way, whether you loved it or hey, listen, they get it, and they're going to put the Honda touch on it, and they've got this built-in market. And all of a sudden, they yanked the plug. They yanked the plug on the Zero series, and then the Afila announcement was just like a week later, which I'm
Yeah.
sure was
Yeah, and
connected.
the
Was that a smart
Acura,
move?
yeah. Well, in their case, I don't know, did you read the Honda press release from Japan?
I've read a lot. I'm not sure if I read specifically
Yeah.
that press release.
Well,
I mean, I've read quotes from it.
it was really depressing, right? Like they're basically saying we are not competitive with the new Chinese models. We just can't compete with them, and sales are slowing. Everything's going in sort of negative direction, and they basically had to, right? Like they are
Yeah,
not in good
they
financial
waited too
shape.
long.
Yeah, so for them,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
for them, I don't think it was that they actually really truly wanted to exit the EV market. They just simply couldn't afford it. That it was about survival, right? That they had to kill these models. But it's like then if you think about and roll back in context their partnership with GM, which they got flack for or whatever it is, but like the Honda Prologue, has sold well when they had like dealer incentives and stuff. But like that's to your point. Like that was one of the beauties of GM. They had this platform where they literally have like 15 models right across not only their own brands, GMC, Chevy, Cadillac, but Honda and Acura, right? Like that's scale. The only way you're going to get profitable is to scale these up, and that was the beauty of that. And maybe Honda should have just sort of continued to lean into that until they got their financial condition back in shape, right? I mean, it's a little bit embarrassing to like your EVs are not your EVs, they're GMs and stuff, but you got to play in this game, or especially in like California where people love Honda and they love EVs,
Mhm.
right? And what's their offering going to be? Because the rumor is that they're going to end the GM contract at the end of this year, right? So then they have zero EVs, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just like, how is that going to look in another 5 or 10 years? I mean, the market is not growing for ICE vehicles; it is shrinking, and it's just a question of how fast. I just don't see a future if your automotive brand is strictly going to be ICE vehicles
Yeah,
for the
yeah. And so
foreseeable future.
that's actually probably a really good pivot since we've been picking on, a few brands and stuff. But, Toyota is the story of 2026, right? Toyota has been beat up a lot by especially sort of EV zealots and stuff.
In our world, for sure,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
bit of a
Yeah,
punching bag.
and
Yeah.
and and I've had a lot of conversations with John Volker about this, but it's like a lot of the sort of anti-EV sentiment that came out from Toyota was like these old retiring executives from Japan. It wasn't like Toyota America, right? And I've worked with the folks in Toyota and the charging teams and stuff like that. And they are all in and passionate about EVs. They just wanted to wait until they got it right and the charging experience was where it was. And so now look at it, right? Like they're going from two models, Toyota and a Lexus, to the end of this year, they're going to have six across both of them. And now both them and Subaru announced like, another model coming out, right? And stuff. So next year, Toyota, if you look at both the Toyota and Lexus brands, they might have like 9 BEVs, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and meanwhile, Stellantis and other people are pulling back and stuff and Honda and stuff. And it's like, so Toyota's, they're one of those companies and brands that can move a market, right? And I know you both know this, but there's a lot of studies out there that have said that the number one automotive brand that consumers want an EV is Toyota. And interestingly, Honda, I think,
Okay.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
number
yeah.
two,
Not aware
right?
of that.
But
I'm not
but
surprised to hear
so
that, but I was not aware that actually is a fact.
yeah,
So what's interesting with Toyota is the part of I would say the vitriol from EV circles is their CEO, their former CEO, Toyota. He made a lot of comments. They're like, hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. That's where we see the future. So I think that kind of got a lot of people's ire. And in the meantime, they launched the BZ4. It's a word salad. Car.
the worst name of a of a car model ever, right?
Yeah, a model ever. So the BZ4 something or other, that thing was I imagine it was a sales flop. I know critically it was panned, slow
Mm,
charger, just poor performance stats left to right. But once again, they slow rolled their EV development, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that we were not aware of. And now the new and improved BZ, it's now been shortened. The name is just BZ. Apparently, the specs
right.
are pretty decent right now. And now you've got all these new models that are on their way within the next year. So hey, they may have the last laugh. They may have played it just right. Seems like Honda we're just a little too slow, and we're truly not developing stuff in the background.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah. And going back to your question, Rob, about what they've done right and wrong, and we've touched on this, and GM did it right with with sort of the platform and lots of models and stuff, and Ford got that wrong, right? Like, you've got the Transit on its own platform, you've got the F-150 Lightning on its own platform, the Mustang Mach-E in its own, right? Where was the scale, right? And also what boggles my mind is where was the Lincoln version of the Mach-E, right? That was a natural to me, right? Like, why didn't they take that platform and make, like three models out of it? Maybe it was
Mhm.
economic, right? And stuff, but
Probably because they're losing they're probably losing $30,000 in every car they sold. I know they certainly were with
Yeah.
the Lightning.
yeah, but I get so tired of that argument, right? Like, it's a new product. New products take a long time to become profitable, and this is new platform, right? Like Tesla, depending on how you look at their data, it took them, I think it was 16 years to become profitable. Like they had one profitable quarter in there, but to be continuously profitable, I think it was like 16 years, right? Or 11, whatever it was. But like, so why does Ford and Stellantis and everybody think that they're going to be profitable in 1 year, spending billions of dollars in when the market is still doing this, right? Like you've got to get in and play the game and scale it up and have some patience. And But meanwhile, it's easier
Yeah,
just to
and,
sell
then they
more
double
RAM.
down by having the write downs after they're losing their millions upon billions of dollars, and then closing the factories on top of that, which is just yet
Yeah, but
another
but
factor.
Lauren, you know the answer to this question already. It's these executives that know everything. They can't be told. They haven't learned anything from the newcomers into the marketplace. These guys at these big auto companies, they know better than everybody else. They can see the future, so they can't possibly be wrong. Yes, let's pivot. I think one of the things that Rob and I have talked a lot about is the user experience, right? The charging experience itself, and really how bad that's been, how much room for improvement there is. When do you think, or how close do you think we are to a charging experience that feels truly seamless? Plug and charge, a true standard for the connector. What's your crystal ball telling you?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely on the right track. The problem is we have 70,000 fast charge. If we just focus on fast charging for a moment, 70,000 fast charging ports out there with a lot of them, many of them, 40,000 of them deployed before like 2023, right? Some of them are slower. A lot of those probably are not as reliable. They don't have plug and charge, right? They may not have a tap and pay. They most likely don't have a tap and pay, credit card reader, etc. So, yeah, so part of it is just like we've got to work through a lot of the older ones. The good news is that, we added almost 17,000 new fast charging ports last year. Like I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but in like the last 3 years, we've added 40%, some number like that of all the fast chargers, right? In history, right? And so when you have, like Walmart and Iona and BP Pulse and, and not to mention like EVgo's like, picking up pace and Tesla's continuing to deploy it at an all-time historical pace, right? Like it's sort of, again, it all comes back to math, right? Like, so the numbers we're deploying at such scale now that those older low power, unreliable ones are like becoming such a small percentage of the market, and people are gravitating to these newer, bigger brands, right? And so
Mm.
the experience is definitely getting better. The NACS port and standardizing that is obviously a really good move. I believe I actually have this in my database, I should know, but I think every new BEV coming out this year, maybe except one, will have the NACS port standard on the car, right? So that's going to help. But we still are for several years going to have what I called several years ago adapter hell, right? Where new right, where new drivers like just they're not experts. They don't know what J1772 is, and like they don't know the difference between a KW and a KWH and all this kind of stuff, and it's like a whole new language, right? And so for those people it's like, oh, I needed to like buy an adapter and keep it in my car to charge my NACS port at a CCS. What is CCS, right? Like, so we
Yeah.
have this period of sort of uncomfortableness that we have to get to and then work through all these things, right? Like Iona is doing a nice job, and as well as Walmart, BP Pulse, where they're and it varies, but they're doing roughly about 50-50 CCS and NACS. So that, when people pull in, it's really easy as long as they know what their car can do, right?
Yeah.
Which is the first part,
Although,
which they may not. A lot of them actually don't. A lot of new drivers
Yeah.
don't know what they can, what
that's
they're,
why Tesla with the Magic Dock, that's really the one
yeah,
eloquent
yeah, yeah,
solution right now, which won't be necessary in
yeah,
a few years, but that's
yeah.
really the probably the best
Yeah,
system.
but yeah, but Scott, I think plug and charge to me is huge. Not everybody is like super fan of it, but everybody wants the quote unquote Tesla experience, right? You
Hmm.
literally pull in, you don't have to think, right? Hopefully, we'll get to the point where you don't have to think about which cable you grab, right? You plug in and walk away and go into the In-N-Out burger and have a nice 30-minute lunch or a Chipotle burrito bowl. And as you get up from the table, your app says it's done charging, and you go out and get in and go on to Disney World or Disneyland or wherever you're going, right? But the other pieces of this, Scott, that are really starting to improve is, the old days of like 1 or 2 50 kW chargers located in the dark back corner by the trash cans, right, is improving. Now they're in like, in the Walmart parking lot and you walk, 100 yards or whatever it is, they're an Iona next, they have a lounge, right? Like
Yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah.
there's bathrooms, not
Yeah,
all
I
of
was
them,
just gonna
obviously.
say there's toilets and an overhang to keep
As
you from getting
crazy as
wet.
that sounds, Scott, as crazy as it
No,
sounds, with
no,
all the
I
road
listen,
tripping
I
I've
know.
done, it's like it's amazing here how few
No,
places have restrooms. Like, you're sitting there for
no,
20
I
minutes,
know.
you're on a
I
road trip,
trust me.
probably need a
Yeah.
Yeah.
restroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you walk into the Starbucks across the street and the sign says, no EV drivers.
EV drivers go
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, but the other thing that's happening is that I was gonna mention is, we're going from those like, 2Zs, maybe 4 ports, right, to most of the major companies, like almost all of the major charging networks are doing a minimum of 8 to 10, right? Tesla's doing 20 and 40s and stuff like that, right? So that's the other piece of that experience is when I'm going en route, mm, I have greater confidence that not just there'll be working chargers, but there'll be available chargers, right? And if there's only 2 stalls, right? w- One is busy and one is broken, right? When you
And
have
one's not
Broken.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
eight, 10 or
Yeah.
12, right? One is broken and 6 are, being used. You still have an option, right? So that size of the stations is a massive aspect as well of that sort of reliability and availability and stuff. So to answer your question, I think we're still probably about 3 years away from
Mm.
when sort of all boats sort of rise, right? We've got to work through this uncomfortable adapter thing and getting all the cars with plug and charge and things like that. Next, we need to get the automakers to increase their maximum charging curves, right? We still have too many
Oh
EVs
yeah.
coming, including I'll pick on Toyota. I love them, but a lot of their cars still only have a maximum 150 kW charging speed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, those need to be above 200, 250, right? And that type of thing. We need to get those charging curves to, 15 to 18 minutes. And I think once most of the cars are at that level, I don't think we need to get to 5 minutes in the near term. But if you can get it under 20 minutes, right? That's, you're
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
line. You're in line at the Chipotle, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
doing your order and going to the bathroom for almost 20 minutes, right? So, yeah.
Well, yeah, you don't at that point feel like you're trading time for charging. That's the big thing for me is
Yes.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't be trading your time. In my business, I talk a lot about time freedom and time poverty, and this idea of time is your most finite resource. Like as long as people keep seeing that they're trading time for charging, it's never going to be a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm
There's no
I'm
question
working
about it.
right yeah, I'm working right now on an article slash I guess LinkedIn post about charging habit stacking. And and
Mm.
I had always been for years I have a slide that says parking equals charging. Dedrick Roper, longtime guy in the industry, did a post the other day or a couple weeks ago about habit stacking, and I was like, I've never heard that term, but I knew what it was. Right, it's the
Mm.
idea that you stack other things on top, right? And that's really what EV
Yeah.
charging is all about, right? You drive to work, you plug in at work, you come in home, you plug in, you go to, the In-N-Out burger or whatever, you go to the Walmart, like all of these things, you're charging while you're doing other things. And back to one of your original questions, Rob, is that's one of the weaknesses of the auto industry is not getting right. They still have not educated consumers that charging is a different experience, right?
Hey,
They
that's what
still
we're
are,
trying to do right here, right? Yeah.
yeah.
But
And
our
Scott said it,
megaphone may
right?
not be large enough.
They're still struggling to let go of that centralized model of you drive to a gas station, as opposed to every time your car is stopped and parked, it can be plugged in and charged, right? And that's a completely different mindset.
So, Lauren, I'm not sure if I posted this or I thought about this post and never quite did it. I've had ample time to obviously think about this, right? Doing the show and driving my EV. The consumer habit that needs to break is when you're filling up with gas, you're reactive. You see the needle on E, you fill up the car. As an EV driver, you have to be proactive. You have to think ahead of time. That's the big mindset difference. And if you do that, it's easy. It's easy peasy. It's like you're still going to not be burning your time charging and waiting around and doing nothing. You, generally speaking, will be extremely efficient with that. But to me, that's the consumer habit that needs to be broken and changed.
Yeah, I have another slide that I used to use a lot, which is comparing that with a gas car. You do a fill up, right? You go down to the however comfortable you are to the
Yeah.
E, right?
Quarter,
Some
one
people
eighth.
go
Yeah.
below
Tank. Yeah.
people go below the E, some people go to a quarter tank, right? And then it's okay, I got to go to.
Yeah. E stands for
But
enough,
with it,
right?
right, but with an EV, but with an EV, except when you're on road trips, it's a replenishment model. You drive 30 miles to work and back, or take the kids to the soccer practice, whatever it is, and you plug
Take a
in and
sip.
you
Yep.
replenish those miles, and it only takes 30 minutes to replenish those miles or whatever on level 2, right? It's a different mindset, and that's just one of many things that this industry still has to work on as far as education and awareness.
All righty. Well, on that note, we are coming up on time right now, Lauren, and I feel like we could
Yeah.
have had this conversation for another 2 hours, but your time is valuable. I'm sure you've got better things to do. So on that note, real fast, can you tell the listeners at home how they can, find you or Chargeonomics online?
Yeah, I mean, really, the best thing is just to follow me on LinkedIn, right? Loren McDonald, right? There's only one famous Loren McDonald on LinkedIn. It's actually, that's my LinkedIn is LorenMcDonald. That's really the best way. Is you can, if we're not already connected or whatever, send me an invite, and then we can message on LinkedIn. And yeah, I as we discussed earlier, I leaned in on LinkedIn, and it's been a godsend, and that's the best way to interact with me, really.
Yeah, highly recommended. I really do recommend to follow, and I'll make sure I share a link in the show notes for everyone to find. So, Lauren, thank you so much once again for joining us here today.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and enjoyed the conversation with both of you.
Wonderful. And to our
Thanks, Lauren.
listeners at home, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a rating, and better yet, share it with a friend or colleague. The road to sustainability starts with the plug, and that's why we're here. We will see you all next week with a new episode of the Urban EV Podcast.